The knock came at 7:14 on a Saturday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. I set my coffee down, crossed the hallway, and opened the front door. A young man I'd never seen before stood on my porch holding a leather-bound photo album I hadn't seen in 9 years. My old field portfolio. The one I gave my daughter the day she graduated high school. The one she cried over and promised she'd treasure forever. He had it pressed against his chest like it was something fragile and important. His eyes were red like he'd been driving a long time without sleeping. "Mr. Calloway?" he asked. I nodded. "My name is Jared Whitfield. I'm engaged to your daughter." He held up the album. "And I need to know? Why didn't she tell me who you used to be?" I stared at that album. The leather was cracked now, the spine soft from age. I could see the corner of a photograph poking out from the top, black and white, the edges curled. I remembered every image inside it. 20 years of my life lived behind a camera lens in places most people couldn't find on a map. I stepped aside and let him in. That album contained war zones, refugee camps, dictators, and dying children. I gave it to my daughter because I thought she was proud of me. She buried it in a closet and told her fiancé I didn't exist. My name is Shane Calloway. I'm 53, I live in Savannah, Georgia, and I run a small portrait photography studio on the east side of town. Families, seniors, newborns, that's my bread and butter now. But for 18 years before that, I was a conflict photojournalist. I covered wars in Syria, Iraq, Somalia, South Sudan. I shot for wire services that fed images to every major newspaper on the planet. When I was 36, I won the Pulitzer Prize for feature photography, for a series one shot in a refugee camp outside Juba. Children standing in doorways of bombed-out schools, looking straight into my lens like they were asking the whole world why nobody came. 5 years after that, an IED outside Aleppo ended my career. The blast shattered my left knee and left burn scars running from my neck to my jawline. I spent 4 months in a hospital in Germany, learning how to walk again. When I came home, I bought a small studio, hung up my field cameras, and started photographing people who were smiling instead of screaming. I raised my daughter Sienna alone. Her mother drove away when Sienna was 4 and never looked back, so it was me and my girl against everything for over 20 years. I braided her hair before school every morning until she was 12. I coached her soccer team. I sat front row at every recital. She was my whole world. And then she grew up. And I became someone she wanted to erase. The distance started in high school. Sienna came home one afternoon and dropped her backpack on the kitchen floor without looking at me. Megan asked, "What happened to your face today?" she muttered. I was standing at the stove, stirring pasta. My hand stopped. "What did you tell her?" Sienna shrugged. "I told her you were in an accident." She said it flat, like she was reporting the weather. No curiosity, no pride, just embarrassment packaged as indifference. I set the spoon down. "It wasn't an accident, Sienna. I was covering I know what happened, Dad." She grabbed an apple from the counter and walked toward the stairs. "I just don't want to explain it to everyone." That was the first crack. By college, the cracks were canyons. She stopped bringing friends home. She stopped posting photos of us together. When she graduated, I drove 6 hours to the ceremony and sat alone in the auditorium because she told me her friends, families had already filled the seats near hers. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. After college, she moved to Charleston for an interior design job at some upscale firm. Visits became quarterly, then twice a year, then holidays I had to ask about. Phone calls got shorter. I'd ask how she was doing, and she'd say, "Fine," like the word was a door she was closing in my face. 8 months before the engagement party, Sienna called me on a Tuesday evening. I was in my studio editing portraits when her name lit up my phone. I answered on the first ring because that's what fathers do. "Hey, Dad, so I have news." Her voice was light, almost girlish. It reminded me of how she sounded at 13, telling me she made the travel team. "I'm engaged." My chest swelled. "Sienna, that's wonderful. Who is he? When can I meet him?" A pause. Just half a second, but I caught it. His name is Jared. He's in commercial real estate. He's really great. I'd love to meet him. Maybe I can drive up next weekend, and... Let's not rush it, she cut in. Things are kind of hectic right now with planning and work. I'll figure out a time. I leaned back in my chair. Okay, just let me know. I will. She didn't. Weeks passed. I texted twice asking about a visit. She responded with vague maybes and rain checks. I told myself she was busy. I told myself planning an engagement was stressful. I made every excuse her silence required because the alternative, that my daughter didn't want me near the most important moment of her life, was something I wasn't ready to hold. 3 weeks before the party, my phone buzzed while I was framing a portrait in my studio. A text from Sienna. I read it twice. Hey, Dad. So the engagement party is on the 14th. It's mostly his family, so let's avoid awkwardness. I think it's best if we keep it small on our side. I set the phone face down on my desk. Picked up my framing tool. Put it down again. Picked the phone back up and read it a third time. Let's avoid awkwardness. I typed back 2 words. Of course. Then I stared at those 2 words for a long time. That night I called her. She answered on the 4th ring, which meant she almost didn't. Hey, Dad, what's up? I got your text about the party. I just wanted to understand what you meant. A sharp exhale on her end. Don't make this into a thing. You wouldn't know anyone there. You'd be standing around alone. I'd know you, I said quietly. I'd be there for you. Dad, I don't want a lot of questions, okay? People are going to ask about the cane, about your neck, and I don't want my engagement party to turn into a story about you. The words landed like a slap. A story about you. As if my scars were some inconvenience she had to manage. I'll make it up to you, she added quickly. We'll do dinner, just the 3 of us, I promise. I agreed. I hung up. That dinner was never scheduled. The night of the engagement party, I sat in my living room surrounded by other people's family portraits. I'd edited photos all day to keep my hands busy and my mind quiet. Around 8 o'clock, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Sienna's friends had tagged her in dozens of photos. A rooftop venue in Charleston strung with lights. Long tables covered in white linen. Jared's family was large, well-dressed, clearly connected. Sienna stood in the center of every frame, wearing a champagne-colored dress and a smile so wide it could have been on a magazine cover. She looked like a woman with no shadows in her past, no scarred father in a small town, no history she needed to hide. I closed the app and sat in the dark for a while. My knee ached the way it always did when the weather shifted, a deep throb that radiated up through my hip. I pressed my thumb into the joint and breathed through it. Then I went to bed at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night because there was nothing else to do. My daughter was celebrating the biggest night of her life 3 hours away, and I was alone in a house full of strangers, smiling faces pinned to every wall. I left the porch light on out of habit. Nobody was coming, but I left it on anyway. The next morning my phone rang from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A woman's voice, warm and confident. Mr. Calloway, my name is Josephine Whitfield. I'm Jared's mother. He gave me your number, and I wanted to reach out personally. I'd love to meet you before the wedding. It would mean so much to our family to get to know Sienna's father. Please call me back when you have a chance. I played it twice. If Sienna told them I wasn't in her life, why was Jared's mother calling me like I mattered? I dialed Sienna immediately. She picked up fast this time. Dad. Hey, I was going to call you. Josephine Whitfield just left me a voicemail. She wants to meet me. Dead silence. Then, almost in a whisper, why is she calling you? What did you say to Jared? I haven't spoken to Jared. I don't even know Jared. Don't call her back. Her voice sharpened. Please, I'll handle it. I gripped the phone harder. Handle what, Sienna? What exactly have you told these people about me? The line went quiet for 3 seconds. Then she hung up. No explanation, no apology. Just a dead line and the sound of my own breathing in an empty kitchen. I set the phone down and stared at it like it might ring again. It didn't. I didn't call Josephine back. not because Sienna told me not to, because I needed to understand what I was walking into first. Over the next few days, I replayed every conversation I'd had with Sienna over the past year, searching for what I'd missed. She never once mentioned Jared's last name. She never described his family. She never told me anything that would have let me Google them or reach out on my own. That was deliberate. She'd built a wall between me and that family, brick by careful brick, and I hadn't even noticed it going up. I picked up my phone and searched Josephine Whitfield. What I found made my stomach drop. The Whitfield Press Freedom Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting journalists in conflict zones and supporting the families of reporters killed or injured in the field. Josephine had founded it 15 years ago after a close friend, a war correspondent, was killed covering a militia uprising in Libya. Her foundation had funded safety training for field reporters, legal defense for imprisoned journalists, and rehabilitation programs for wounded photographers and camera operators. People like me. My daughter was engaged to the son of a woman who had dedicated her life to honoring people exactly like me, and Sienna had told them I wasn't in the picture. She'd erased me from the one family that would have understood me most. 2 weeks after the engagement party, the truth walked out of a closet. Literally. Jared told me everything later, sitting in my living room with the album between us, and I'm going to tell it the way he told it to me. He was at Sienna's apartment on a Saturday afternoon. She'd asked him to grab a box of fabric samples from the top shelf of her hall closet. He reached up, pulled a box forward, and something heavy tumbled off the shelf behind it. A leather case hit the floor and fell open. Photographs spilled across the hardwood. Dozens of them. Black and white, color, large format prints. A child standing in rubble with dust in her hair. A woman carrying a water jug across a cracked desert, her shadow stretching for miles. Soldiers crouched behind a concrete wall, with their eyes wide. Jared knelt down and picked one up. On the back, written in pencil, Shane Calloway, Aleppo, 2015. He picked up another. Shane Calloway, Juba, 2009. At the bottom of the case, sealed in a protective plastic sleeve, was a framed certificate. The Pulitzer Prize for feature photography, awarded to Shane Calloway. Jared sat on that closet floor for 20 minutes, going through every single photograph. Then he pulled out his phone and typed my name into a search bar. And the walls his fiancé had built came crashing down. The search results loaded fast. Articles in the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine. Retrospectives of my work. Interviews from a decade ago where I talked about what it felt like to photograph suffering and try to make the world pay attention. A Wikipedia page with my portrait, younger, unscarred, standing straight, holding a camera in a dusty street in South Sudan. Then Jared scrolled further. My studio website. A recent photo of me on the About page. Older now, scarred, leaning on a cane, but with the same eyes. He told me later that he sat on that closet floor, staring at the two photos side by side, the young man in the war zone and the older man in the Savannah studio, and he couldn't understand how Sienna had hidden both versions of me. He called her first. She didn't answer, so he called his mother. Mom, does the name Shane Calloway mean anything to you? Josephine went silent on the other end. When she spoke, her voice was different. Shane Calloway? The photojournalist? His South Sudan series is hanging in my office, Jared. He's one of the most important conflict photographers of the last 30 years. She paused. Why are you asking me this? Jared swallowed. He's Sienna's father. Nothing. Then Josephine, barely above a whisper, That's not possible. Sienna told us her father wasn't in her life. She lied, Mom. About everything. Jared drove to Savannah without telling Sienna. 3.5 hours on I-16 with my photo album on the passenger seat and a head full of questions. He told me later he almost turned around twice. Not because he didn't want answers, but because he wasn't sure he was ready for them. But he kept driving. That's how he ended up on my porch at 7:14 in the morning, holding 20 years of my life in his hands. I brought him inside. We sat in the living room. The walls were covered in portraits I'd taken. Local families, elderly couples holding hands, Newborns sleeping in baskets. Warm, ordinary, beautiful. Jared set the album on the coffee table between us. She told me you weren't in her life, he said, pressing his palms flat on his knees. She told me you did odd jobs. She told me you two grew apart after her mother left. Each sentence hit like a stone dropped into still water. That's what she said, I replied quietly. He nodded. She showed me nothing. No photos of you. Nothing about your career, your history, nothing. I had to find out from a closet floor that my fiancé's father is a Pulitzer Prize winning photojournalist. I didn't respond right away. I reached forward and opened the album. I hadn't touched these photographs in 9 years. I turned the pages slowly. Jared leaned forward, watching. The first image was a wide shot of a refugee camp at dawn. Rows of tents stretching to the horizon under a pink sky. The next was the photograph that won the Pulitzer. A girl, maybe 7 years old, standing in the doorway of a bombed-out school in Juba. She was barefoot. Her dress was torn, but she was looking directly into my lens with an expression that wasn't fear or sadness. It was defiance, like she was daring the world to look away. That photograph, Jared said softly, pointing at it. My mother has a print of that exact image in her office. She's shown it to every donor who's ever walked through her door. She calls it the reason she started her foundation. My throat tightened. I didn't know that. Jared sat back and rubbed his face with both hands. Mr. Calloway, my mother has spent 15 years fighting for journalists like you. She's funded rehabilitation for wounded correspondents. She's paid for funerals when news agencies wouldn't. Your work, your actual career, is the thing that inspired her life's work. He dropped his hands and looked at me. And Sienna told me you fixed things around the house for money. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because my daughter had taken a Pulitzer Prize and turned it into odd jobs. She'd taken war zones and made them disappear. Why didn't she tell me any of this? Jared's voice cracked on the question. He wasn't angry yet. He was something worse, confused in a way that made his whole face look younger, like a kid discovering something he trusted was hollow. I closed the album and set my hands flat on top of it. Because this is what her father looks like now. I gestured at myself. The cane propped against the couch, the scarring that ran from my collar to my jaw, the way I sat crooked because my left knee never bent right after the surgery. She wasn't embarrassed by my career, Jared. She was embarrassed by what it cost me. He shook his head. That doesn't make it okay. No, I agreed. It doesn't. He stood up and walked to the wall where I'd hung a series of portraits. A grandmother holding her granddaughter's hand. A veteran in his uniform, medals pinned to his chest. A young couple laughing under an oak tree. You still do beautiful work, he said without turning around. Thank you. He faced me again. And something had changed in his expression. The confusion was hardening into something sharper. I need to talk to Sienna. I need to hear her explain this to my face. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't defend her. I just nodded and handed him the album. Take it. She should see what she hid. Jared drove back to Charleston that afternoon. Sienna had been calling him for hours. He didn't pick up once. He told me later that he walked into her apartment around 6 o'clock, set the leather album on the kitchen counter, and waited for her to come out of the bedroom. She appeared in the hallway already talking. Where have you been? I've been calling all day. I was worried sick. She stopped. Her eyes landed on the album. The color drained from her face so fast Jared said it was like watching someone get hit. Where did you get that? She whispered. Your closet. His voice was level, controlled. Why is your father's Pulitzer Prize in the back of your closet, Sienna? She didn't answer. Her hand went to the counter like she needed something solid to hold on to. My mother has his photograph hanging in her office. Jared continued, stepping closer. The girl in the doorway. She shows it to every single donor. She calls it the image that changed her life. And you told me your father does odd jobs. Jared, listen. I'm listening. I've been listening for 14 months. And everything you told me about him was a lie. Sienna's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together tight, trying to hold herself in place. But Jared didn't move. He just stood there next to that album, waiting for an answer that was already too late. You don't understand what it was like, Sienna finally said. Her voice came out ragged, thin. When I was in high school, kids stared at him, They asked what happened to my dad like he was some kind of freak. I had to explain it over and over. The scars, the limp, the cane. And people would do that thing where they tilt their head and say, "Oh, that's so sad," and then look at me different for the rest of the year. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I just wanted a clean start. I wanted to be normal. Jared didn't move. Normal? Yes, normal. I wanted a relationship where my father's trauma wasn't the first thing people saw when they looked at me. Jared's jaw tightened. He spent 18 years in war zones, documenting things the rest of us were too comfortable to look at. He nearly died so people could see the truth. And you treated him like something to be ashamed of. I wasn't ashamed of what he did. I was ashamed of... She stopped herself. But it was too late. The sentence finished itself in the air between them. She was ashamed of what he looked like. Of the limp. Of the scars. Of the cane and the crooked way he sat. Jared's eyes narrowed. Finish that sentence. She wouldn't. She just stood there crying, and the silence said everything her mouth couldn't. Jared pulled a chair from the kitchen table and sat down. He didn't comfort her. He didn't close the distance between them. He just sat and spoke in a voice that was terrifyingly calm. When were you going to tell me the truth? After the wedding? After we had kids and they asked why they never met their grandfather? Sienna shook her head. I was going to tell you eventually. Eventually. He repeated the word like it tasted wrong. You hid your father from me for 14 months. You let my mother, the woman who runs a foundation for journalists exactly like him, believe he abandoned you. You let her feel sorry for you, Sienna. You used his absence as sympathy. That's not what I... What did you think would happen? That we'd get married and I'd just never meet him? That my mother would never find out that the photographer whose work she's championed for a decade is her daughter-in-law's father? Sienna sank onto a kitchen stool. Her mascara was streaking down her cheeks. If you can lie to me this easily about your own father, Jared said, leaning forward, the man who raised you alone, who braided your hair and drove to every game and gave you the most important work of his career as a gift, what else have you lied about? He stood up. What else will you lie about? She reached for his hand. He pulled it back. Jared didn't break off the engagement that night. What he did was worse. For Sienna, at least. He gave her a condition. You're going to invite your father to dinner at my mother's house. Not the big party. Not 100 people. Just family. You're going to introduce him, honestly, in person, to the people you lied to. And you're going to do it within 2 weeks, or I'm done. Sienna's face crumpled. Jared, I can't. Your mother will... My mother will what? Respect him? Admire him? Treat him the way you should have been treating him your entire adult life? He picked up the album from the counter. 2 weeks, Sienna. That's not a negotiation. She called me the next evening. Her voice was small, stripped of every defense she'd carried for years. Dad, I need you to come to Charleston. For dinner. At Jared's parents' house. I gripped the phone. Why? Because Jared knows everything. And he wants you to meet his mother. I let the silence stretch. Not to punish her. Because I needed a moment to absorb that my daughter was only inviting me into her life. Because someone else had forced open the door. When? I asked. Saturday. I wrote it down. I didn't say it was okay. I didn't say I forgave her. I just said, I'll be there. I drove to Charleston on a Saturday morning wearing a pressed blue shirt, clean jeans, and my good boots. My cane was in the passenger seat. The burn scars on my neck were visible above my collar because I was done hiding them for anyone. Jared met me at the front door of a beautiful brick home in the historic district. He shook my hand with both of his. Thank you for coming, Mr. Calloway. Shane. I corrected him. He smiled. Shane. Josephine Whitfield was standing in the foyer behind her son. The moment she saw me, her hand went to her mouth. She crossed the room in 4 quick steps and took both of my hands in hers. My God, she breathed. You're really him. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. Mr. Calloway. Shane, your photograph of that girl in the doorway in Juba. I have shown that image to 1,000 people. It changed the way I understood this work. It is an honor to have you in my home. My eyes burned. I squeezed her hands. Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know. She led me into the dining room, where Jared's father, a tall man with kind eyes, stood to shake my hand. Jared's younger sister, a journalism student, was practically bouncing in her chair. And Sienna sat at the far end of the table, staring at her plate, unable to look at any of us. Josephine asked me about my career over the first course. I hadn't talked about it in years, but the questions were genuine, and the room was warm, so I let myself remember. I told them about the refugee camp in Juba, about the girl in the doorway, about how she'd grabbed my wrist after I took the photo and asked if people would see it. I told them about the moment the IED went off, how the sound disappeared before the pain arrived, how I woke up in a German hospital room not knowing if I still had legs. Jared's father asked quiet, respectful questions. His sister scribbled notes on a napkin. Josephine's eyes glistened, and Sienna sat through all of it in silence. Every story I told was a story she already knew. Every moment of bravery, every scar, every sacrifice. She'd carried the evidence in a closet for 9 years and called it baggage. After dinner, Josephine touched Sienna's elbow and led her to a room off the hallway. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see them through the glass pane in the door. Josephine spoke calmly. Sienna listened. Then Sienna's face crumbled in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. Not the defensive crying from before, but the deep, shaking kind that starts in the chest and won't stop. Jared told me later what his mother asked her. One question. Just one. If you were ashamed of a man like that, what would you have done with someone ordinary? The engagement didn't survive the next 3 months. Jared told me it wasn't only about the lying. It was about what the lying revealed. A person who could erase her own father to protect an image was a person whose love came with conditions. And conditional love, I've learned, is just performance with a deadline. Sienna called me once after the breakup. She was crying. She said she was sorry. She said she'd made the worst mistake of her life, and she didn't mean any of it. I told her the door was open whenever she was ready to walk through it, honestly. She hasn't called since. But I leave the porch light on. Every night. Because that's what fathers do. My whole career I pointed a camera at the truth and asked the world to look. I never thought the hardest truth I'd face would be in my own family. But here's what I know. The people who love you when you're scarred and limping are the only ones worth keeping when the scars finally fade. Everyone else is just waiting for a version of you that's easier to explain. Have you ever been the person someone was ashamed of and watched them realize too late what they lost? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this hit you somewhere real, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.